What's going on, agents? Ask Adam here. If you enjoy today's content, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to get future Division 2 updates. Also remember to hit the bell icon to get notified when I upload a new video. Before I get started, I would like to say thank you to my fellow service members and veterans. We love you. Thank you for your service. Also, suicide is never an option. If you are feeling suicidal, please get help. Call a family member, call a friend, call the National Suicide Hotline, message me. Do what you need to do to get well. So for today's topic, I want to discuss what you need to do to prepare for the skills update in Title Update 5. I'm going to start with the basics of a current skill build and what you need to farm to get ready for Title Update 5. Then I'm going to move into some theory crafting. We're definitely going to be doing some theory crafting today about possible builds. So let's start off by talking about current skill builds. The most popular skill build and about the only viable skill build, and I said about the only viable skill build, I know there are a couple, but the one that most people run is the explosive damage skill build with the Seeker Mines. Why? Because it's really, like I said, one of the only viable DPS skill builds. You can do a little bit of healing, you can run the drone a little bit, but it's really the Seeker Mine with the drone bombardier or something like that is really the #1 DPS skill build. And even then it's stretching to say that it's viable. It's workable, but just barely. I bring this up because with TU5 it seems that there are going to be quite a few very, very viable skill builds, and some of those do not revolve around explosive damage. We will get to talk about those in a few minutes. First, I want to go into the basics of a skill build. If you're new to skill builds and you're looking to maybe get into one for Title Update 5, let me go over what you need to know about skill builds. The main components of skill builds, they're currently skill power, cooldown reduction, and skill haste. However, cooldown reduction as of TU5 will be changed on all gear pieces to skill haste, and skill haste will be the only stat that affects cooldowns on your skills. Down in the description below I will link my skill haste spreadsheet so that you can have a look at that and see what different amount of skill haste will do to the different skills. It has all of the skills and their cooldowns and what each amount of skill haste brings the cooldown to. You can even put in your own amount and it will tell you exactly what your cooldowns will be for each skill. So we're going to talk about gear and stat allocation for a second, because I know not everybody understands how gear is rolled in the stat allocation on gear. And so let me take a quick minute and explain what stat allocation means. So on each piece of gear, we'll call it a max points that a piece of gear has that it can roll. Each stat on that gear, or a number on the gear, adds towards that max. We'll say theoretically it's 100. So say you have a holster and it rolls skill power of 1,000. That may add like 85 points to that 100 total for that piece of gear. The armor value also adds to that. The higher the armor, the more it adds to that max. So let's say your armor adds 10 to that. Now you're at 95 out of 100 for that piece of gear. So let's say that that holster that had the 1,000 skill power also has another yellow stat on it, and that stat is skill haste. Well, that haste roll is going to be very small, and that's because there's only 5 points left to get to the cap for that piece of gear. And so the way that it works is if you had a holster that said had only 400 skill power on it instead of 1,000, your haste could roll higher because there's more of that ceiling left before you get to the max on that piece of gear. And of course these numbers are just for simplicity, and we honestly don't know what counts and how much each thing counts towards that cap of where something can roll. And that's part of why RNG is so bad in this game. It's a layer upon layer of RNG. But that's a topic for another time. I mean, I could talk for hours on that, so let me go back to what I was talking about. But as you can see, each stat has its own value towards the cap on a piece of gear. And that is why, just FYI, you will find the highest stat rolls most of the time on single stat items. And that's because they have a higher cap room because there's no other stats pulling from that pool. And so it has a chance, single stat items have the chance to roll the highest values. That's also why I always pick up purples, because purples have less of a chance to roll with more than one stat, so they have a higher chance to roll with a single stat. Now the max may not be as high on that one stat, but that one stat is going to be a higher roll most of the time than something that has two stats on it. And yellow has more of a chance to roll with two stats. And so I always pick up my purples, take a look at them, and see if they got a really high one stat roll, and then I'll take that one stat roll and roll it onto one of my yellow high-end pieces. So for a skill build, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the main components. The main components are skill power, cooldown reduction, skill haste. So we'll start with skill power. Skill power does not affect how much damage or healing your skills do, like in Division 1. Skill power only unlocks more powerful skill mods. It allows you to use more powerful skill mods. It has no other effect. That's it. And I'll talk more about mods later on. The cap on skill power is 3,000. That's a soft cap, and I say that because you can get over 3,000 skill power, but there are no mods that require over 3,000 skill power. So if you have over 3,000 skill power, you're wasting the points after that. That could be used elsewhere. And that's why I had that whole last conversation about how stats are given out on gear. If you've got over 3,000 skill power, some of those points, if they were less and you only had 3,000 skill power, could have been allocated into health or armor or something else on the gear. But that's okay if you have a little over 3,000, because if you have mods that only take 2,500 skill power and you have 3,000 skill power, you're essentially wasting 500 skill points. Again, not a bad thing, especially if you're only at 3,000 or 2,990 or whatnot. You're always looking for those max roll mods, so you want to, while you're building your gear, if you can hit 3,000 skill power, that's fine. Now, if you're only at 2,500 skill power and your mods are only 2,500 and you can get some more haste instead of more skill power, go ahead and get the haste and keep whatever skill power gear for when you find better mods. So next we're going to move on to skill haste. I'm not going to talk about cooldown reduction because cooldown reduction is going to be changed to skill haste as of Title Update 5. And so skill haste, and again, I'm going to link my spreadsheet in the description below so that you can get in there and mess around, take a look at what it's all about. Currently, we don't know how much skill haste we will have come Title Update 5, and that's because the conversion amounts of skill haste that will come on gear isn't known at this time. They said that it was going to be 33%, but I believe that has changed as of the second phase of testing. But we did not have our own characters to test with, so I can't tell you if that was still the stat or still the conversion rate as of the second phase of the PTS testing. So we're not really sure where that's going to end up. Suffice it to say, at this point, you want to keep any gear with high cooldown reduction or skill haste. Well, not skill haste because it actually doesn't roll on gear yet. Only cooldown reduction. So any gear that you get with high cooldown reduction, go ahead and keep that. And how much haste you actually need on a skill build is very dependent on what skills you want to use. Think about this. All turrets, all drones, and the Mender Seeker Mine have had their duration buffed from 120 seconds to 300 seconds. And what that means for skill haste is that if you're running two of those skills, if you can keep that skill alive, you could actually run less skill haste because your skills should not be on cooldown during a fight. The whole point of moving that to 300 seconds is so that you don't have to redeploy during a fight. If that's the case, you don't have to run a haste cooldown mod or much cooldown on your gear unless, your skill gets destroyed. And in that case, you would need to redeploy it. But if you can keep it alive, you're good to go for the whole fight, and then it cools down while you're moving to the next room. Of course, you're always going to want some haste, but you don't necessarily, if you're running those skills, need 10-second cooldowns on everything. The opposite is true if you're using Seeker Mines. You want your cooldown as low as possible so that you can toss Seeker Mines more often. So we will get into skill haste more when we get into the builds, because I believe it's very build dependent, especially with Title Update 5. how much haste you're going to want to run. So let's move to the brand sets now. So for the brand sets, you have for skills the Alps Summit, the China Light, the Petrov Defense, the Providence Defense, and then some random sets that give some skill power to certain skills. But the main that most people use currently are the Alps Summit, which starts with 10% cooldown reduction. That's being changed to 20% skill haste, then 5% skill power for a 2-piece, and 15% hive skill power for the 3-piece. Most people do not run 3 pieces of Alps. Most people mix that up with the China Light because China Light has plus 10% explosive damage, 10% shotgun damage, and 10% cooldown reduction, which is being changed to 30% skill haste. So the 3-piece China Light in a 1 or 2-piece Alps Summit mixed in with possibly the Petrov Defense Group or the Providence Defense. I believe I have 1 Providence Defense because that gives 10% skill power for the first attribute, whereas the Petrov you have to get a 3-piece again to get it will be 30% skill haste. Now don't get too tangled up in the brand sets, because what you're going to do to start out your skill build is you're going to take what you can get. If it has 2 yellows on it and one of those is a good roll, you're going to use that. That is far more important than getting the exact brand sets that you need. Those will come in time. So those are the brand sets that you're looking for. Now I'm going to move on to utility talents for gear. For skill builds, you have a couple of options. There is a talent called Skilled, and that says skill kills have a 25% chance to reset skill cooldowns. That rolls on a backpack. That's a pretty good skill, especially for TU5. As of now on live, it's not so great unless you're running solo, because most of the time if you're in a 4-man group, you are not going to get the kills if you're running skills. It's just if you're running Seeker Mines, yes, that can happen, but a good percentage of the time you're not going to be getting kills. The next one is tech support, and it says kills by active skills grant 25% skill damage for 10 seconds. Again, you have to get the kill, and it has to be by your skill. On live, not such a great talent. It is on a backpack, so if you can get it, use it. Either one of those is fine. Now, another talent that I do use is called Terminate, and this rolls on gloves, and it says depleting an enemy's armor grants 35% skill damage for 15 seconds. This is a very, I think, good skill. I use it on all my skill builds because it's much easier to deplete someone's armor rather than kill them. A lot of times they'll jump into cover, but this also works with your gun. And so you don't have to kill them with a skill. You don't have to deplete their armor with a skill. That works as well, but it also works with your gun. So you can actually, while your skills are shooting or going out to blow stuff up, you can give them a hand by chunking off people's armor to get that extra 35% skill damage. I will touch on really quick as well, there is a chest talent. It's not really tied to skills, but it is in a way, because a lot of people run Seekers. There's a chest talent called Payload, which is destroying an enemy's asset grants 50% explosive damage for 15 seconds. Seems like a lot. I have tried it out a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of it. I would rather go with something else on the chest than Payload, because you don't get a chance to destroy the enemy's assets, and that means, you know, the backpack on the big guys or the little case that the flame guys are carrying around, that kind of thing. So I don't use Payload, but feel free to give that a try if you want. It is something you can throw in there, and if you enjoy using it, use it. 50% explosive damage is pretty cool. I just couldn't get it to proc enough for my liking. There are a few more utility talents that I'm going to touch on really quick. You can throw them into your gear as you get them, depending on what build you use, but one of them is Capacitive, and it's plus 20% skill duration. Comes on all 6 pieces. Destructive, that's 20% explosive damage. That can come on all 6 pieces. Empowered, 10% skill power. You can get that on the mask and the knee pads. In Surge, which will be 20% skill haste. It's actually 10% now, but that can also roll on the mask and the knee pads. Okay, moving on to weapon skills. The main weapon skills for, and I say main, the top weapon skills for a skill build are Perpetuation and Spike. Perpetuation, what that does is headshot kills grant 5% skill duration, ammo, and charges to the next skill used. Your max stack is 10. That does last through combat and through reloads, I believe. And so this is a decent skill, but I don't ever really notice it working. I say that, but I guess I don't really watch for it to work. I have it on my LMG that I use, and so maybe it helps out, maybe it doesn't. I really can't tell you, but you only have two, so I throw them on anyway. So my main one that I usually have on my gun is Perpetuation. The other one is Spike, and Spike sounds really good. It says headshot kills grant 25% skill damage for 10 seconds. The problem is it even if it does work, which I am doubtful, it doesn't give you an icon, so you don't know when it's active. But I have tested this and tried to see if I can notice a damage difference when I get a headshot kill. I do not notice a damage difference ever. So again, I do have it on my secondary weapon because if it helps, it helps, but I never notice it helping. So it's just one of those things. We don't, in my mind, skill players don't really have a good option. I just put those on my build when I find them on a good weapon, because what else are you going to use? Now, as far as the equipped and holstered weapon talents, there are a couple of good ones. The first one I'm going to bring up is In Rhythm, and that is while equipped, enemy kills have a 5% chance to refresh active skill cooldowns, and it does have a 60-second cooldown. This seems to proc pretty often. So I always have In Rhythm on one of my guns, because it doesn't matter, you can put it on your pistol, and even if the pistol's not out, it works. The next one is Recharged, and that is while equipped, skills deployed at full armor have 25% duration, charges, and ammo. This, again, it's one of those that is nice to have. I don't always have it on one of my guns, but if I have it, I will definitely use it. It's just, it's only useful really at the start of a fight or if you're not being targeted. So again, throw it on one of your guns. You've got 3. The next is Rooted, and that's while equipped and in cover, all skill, damage, and healing are increased by 25% for 10 seconds. The buff is lost when exiting cover, and it also has a 60-second cooldown. This again, not the greatest talent ever, but again, you have 3 guns, put it on one of them. That way when you get into cover, if you throw Seeker Mines out, those first Seeker Mines are going to have an extra 25% damage. So this video is running a lot longer than I expected. I'm going to stop right now and start a part 2. I apologize if you're just hanging in there to talk about builds. Definitely come back for the next video and we will get into what talents are going to work and what builds may be viable, especially looking at non-explosive skill builds and possibly even the hardwire gear set. So thanks so much for watching what turned into a part 1 of possibly a mini-series with how long this video went. Please remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to the channel for more Division 2 updates. Also remember to hit that bell notification icon so that you can see when I upload future videos. Thanks a lot. Bye.